Welcome everyone, I'm Helen Close, Heritage Officer for the Women's Engineering Society. This year's Heritage Open Days Festival theme is Astounding Inventions. So we've taken the opportunity to tell the stories of 10 women inventors and innovators in 10 days. Unfortunately, some of the sessions have fallen by the wayside due to national events, but these will be rescheduled. But I'm pleased to say that Dr. Nina Baker is joining us today to tell us about the life and times of Hilda Lyon. The talk should last between 20 to 30 minutes, and Nina, if that's not, if you're going to be longer than that, that's great. If not, then that's fine as well. But there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. But now I'd like to hand over to Nina for today's session of 10 women in 10 days. Go ahead, Nina. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. My name's Nina Baker. I'm an independent engineering historian, and most of what I do is looking into the stories of women who worked in various branches of engineering at various levels, from artisan to professional. And today we're going to look at the story of Hilda Margaret Lyon. The title of my talk, Adventurous Aeronautical Design Engineer, is a kind of conversion from a talk. It's the title of a talk she gave to the Women's Engineering Society London branch about a year before she died, which was called Adventures in Aeronautical Design. So Hilda was born in a town called Market Wheaton, which is in East Yorkshire. She was born on 31st of May, 1896. And this is the building she was born in. So you can see the name of the company over the door, Lyon, and her father, Thomas Lyon, was a very successful grocer. They were providing deliveries of groceries all over that part of Yorkshire. In the time when this photo was taken, they were being delivered by bicycle and horse cart, but later on they had little vans running around the place. That shop is still there, and we will see it again later in the talk. She had 4 older siblings, but of all the Lyons, she was pretty well the only one to even leave Yorkshire. She was considered to be exceptionally bright even at primary school, and the descendants of people who were at school with her told me that the story goes that Hilda would have her hand up with the answer before the rest of the children in the class even realized the question had been asked. So from Market Wheaton Primary School, Hilda went in 1908 to Beverley High School. She was part of the first intake to this brand new school, which had just opened. And unusually for schools of that time, it had complete science laboratories and was taking the scientific education of young women very seriously. The school takes Hilda Lyon very seriously, and in the top middle picture, you can see the back of a senior girl at the school with the name Hilda Lyon pinned to her. And that's because she had chosen at a Heritage Open Doors Day in 2019 to take on the persona of Hilda Lyon while showing people around the school. This year, the school decided it was going to adopt the house system, which is in use in so many British schools, as a way of having multi-age group groupings. And they had a vote to see which women associated with the school would become the names of one of the houses. And I'm delighted to say that Hilda Lyon is one of them. Now, at the moment, there's not very much visible in the school, but I was told today by the deputy head that there's going to be house notice, the woman's name and photo in every classroom, and there will be distinctive, I guess, decor stickers around the school. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of that. The school trained Hilda so well that she was able to go in 1915 to Newnham College, Cambridge. Now, this was a big deal for her family, I imagine. She didn't have a scholarship as far as we know. So her family was paying all the costs of their only, of their daughter going to university, the only person in the family to go to university until modern times. And it can't have been cheap, and it can't have been an easy choice, because normally women were not being trained except possibly to become teachers or doctors. So off she went to Newnham College, where she did maths, and she graduated in 1918. So still, the First World War was still on when she graduated in the summer of 1918. And like most graduates, what she did next was directed by the government's needs in progressing the war. And she was directed to the Air Ministry, where they put her on a course in their department, which was called the Criticism of Strength. And there she learnt how to convert her university applied maths into the structural strength analysis of aeroplane frameworks. She then went initially in 2018 Siddeley Deasy in Coventry. Siddeley Deasy had been a car manufacturer, but like most car companies, they were converted to making what was needed for the war, in their case, aeroplanes. And she was the only person working with the airplane designer doing all the maths that he needed. And she said of this period in her life that she arrived knowing how to speak in the language of mathematicians, but not the language of engineers. And she very quickly found that it was a completely different language, and she had to learn pretty quickly what engineering parlance was in order to tell the engineers and the designers what her mathematics meant in terms of the design. In 1920, she moved to a similar company, George Parnell's in Bristol, and there she took over from another university maths graduate, also another Hilda, a woman called Hilda Hudson. And they were both friends and colleagues and kept in touch and did work together apart from overlapping at George Parnell's. While she was there for 5 years. She worked on, their planes all began with the letter P. She worked on the Puffin, which is the one you can see in this advert at the bottom, Possum, Pixie and Plover. But she also worked on a number of designs for aeroplanes that were never built. And she said she once spent 18 months working on something that then just went straight in the dustbin without ever getting as far as being built, even as a trial plane. In 1922, her expertise and work was recognised by being elected as an Associate Fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society. And again, there wouldn't have been many women in that position then. In 1925, she was recruited to go and work at the Royal Airship Works at Cardington near Bedford. And she was employed there. She was the only professional woman on the technical side. Apart from women in the manufacturing shops and the secretarial staff, she was the only person in the design technical side. And she was working on the structural strength of transverse frames. And indeed, she published this paper about that. And in 1929, the paper that you can see on the right there won her the Royal Aeronautical Society's R38 Memorial Prize, the only time a woman has ever won that. And even to this day, the Royal Aeronautical Society's various prizes, very few women have won them. So she was working on the R101, the airship that sadly crashed on its maiden flight. However, before the official maiden flight, there were a number of trial flights, and Hilda and other members of the staff all got a turn to go up for a brief, perhaps 1 hour flight around the countryside. About the time that the work finished on the R101, Hilda Lyon got a scholarship from her old college at Cambridge to go out to MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and she was about the time that the R101 was very sadly crashing, which she said was very demoralizing. So she went to MIT to work in their wind tunnels, and this was the first time she'd had the opportunity to do her own practical work. At the Royal Airship Works, she might ask for work to be done, but she wasn't involved in running the experiments in the wind tunnels herself. So for this, she had to get models made, she had to fix them up in the wind tunnel, she had to run the wind tunnel experiments herself. And she said of this period that she really wished that after Cambridge, she'd gone to a technical college and learnt some practical engineering skills, because it was a steep learning curve for her doing this work. So here you can see a cross-section through the wind tunnel showing the positioning of the models and the various bits of test equipment she was using. And the point of her work was really to look at something she had noticed during her time, her work before she arrived at MIT, which was that the behavior of aircraft in wind tunnels didn't seem to be matched by their behavior in real life. And she wanted to understand what was going wrong. And so she was looking at turbulence in the sense of the artificially created turbulence in a wind tunnel caused by the structure of the wind tunnel itself. So that the wires or the stand that holds the model, the various frameworks, and she was trying to find ways of reducing that turbulence with various sorts of baffles so as to understand the true behavior of a given shape of model in a wind tunnel. And the outcome of that was this graph, which those annotations, A, B, B, R101 model, etc., are the various models she tried in the wind tunnel. And it's the drag coefficients of all these different shapes. Some of them idealized flat plates, and some of them actual models of actual airships, such as the R101. And Hilda Lyon was a mathematician, so all the reports and papers she ever wrote are mostly maths, all entirely beyond what little I remember of maths. But her writing, her text writing explaining what this stuff meant was a model of clarity, and I'm going to read out to you from her conclusions in her master's thesis. With this assumption, the same volume and the same fineness ratio will have the same drag. In considering the speed and required horsepower, there is therefore nothing to choose between the two shapes. From the structural point of view, the shape with the higher block coefficient has the higher advantage, as it provides a greater gas volume in the nose and tail to balance the concentrated weights of the mooring equipment and the fins, thus relieving the static bending moments on the hull and reducing the structure weight. As the structure weight in modern rigid airships is about 65% of the total lift, a saving of 10% on the structure weight means an increase of nearly 20% in the useful load and probably 65% in the payload. So on the basis of what she learned, came something that came to be known as the Lyon shape, which is a rather rounder shape of airship, and later on also a shape of submarines. And here you can see on the left USS Albacore and a model of her in a wind tunnel. And this shape in America is known as the Lyon shape, named after Hilda Lyon. And some other forms of submarine also make use of that shape. The Delphin German mini subs at the bottom, and the Russian atomic submarine Leninsky Komsomol also used the Lyon shape for their designs. So she came back from MIT with her master's in 1932, and she got a position as a research assistant to this chap, Ludwig Prandtl, at a place called Göttingen. This was the Kaiser Wilhelm Gesellschaft für Strömungsforschung, which means the King William's research of hydrodynamics research institute. And Ludwig Prandtl was an expert in hydrodynamics, but by the time she got there, he was one of the world's leading experts in aerodynamics too. The unfortunate situation was that in 1933, Hilda's mother got ill, terminally ill, and Hilda was called home to look after her. Even though her brother and his wife were still living at home with her parents, Hilda, as the unmarried daughter, was expected to come home and nurse her mother. Now, even today, this sort of career break, which turned into 4 years of career break, would be a career killer. And in those days, she was very fortunate that her name was already sufficiently well known in Britain, particularly at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, that people were sending her bits of work that she could do from home. and we've all been working at home recently and know how demanding that is, but she was nursing her mother as well. So during the period 1933 to 1937, she was working largely on drag and boundary layer effects. She produced papers which she published, including ones for the Royal Aircraft Establishment, and she kept her career going. In 1937, they found a job for her. So she went into the Royal Aircraft as a principal scientific officer, which is quite senior in the scientific setup in the British Civil Service. And she was in the aerodynamics department at the Royal Aircraft Establishment. A lot of what she was working of course, was influenced by the coming war. I'm not going to go through all of her papers, but just to give some examples, this is the effect of ground interference on the wing, or the trim of a low-wing monoplane, which was looking at the problem when the elevators were not able to work sufficiently well near the ground when landing to keep the tail down, so that the aeroplane was pitching forward, which could be disastrous when you're landing. She was also working on dynamic stability in free elevation and lots of similar work. So her work on the behavior of aeroplanes, aerodynamics, carried on all through the war. At the end of the war, the British government sent teams of technical people from all the scientific, engineering, technical and industrial sectors to Germany with the advancing Allied forces. This was known as Operation Surgeon. Very few women went on this. I'm only aware of one other woman, apart from Hilda Lyon, to have gone on any of the Operation Surgeon trips. So she went with a team to Göttingen, which I've mentioned before, and its twin establishment at a place called Wolkenrode. And these were both the top aeronautical design research establishments in Germany, the equivalent of the Royal Aircraft Establishment. So she wrote the report on the work that was being done there, and clearly her German from when she'd been there was sufficiently good that she was able to interview the members of staff and understand the reports and look at the work they had been doing and see what might be useful. The purpose was to recruit both people, expertise, and also equipment, and the Royal Aircraft Establishment boxed up and confiscated as part of war reparations a number of wind tunnels and other equipment from Göttingen and Wolkenrode. But the other result was that people were recruited, and as a result of the work that she had found out about swept back wings and behavior, those, a woman who you can see at the bottom, a woman called Johanna Weber, and her colleague Dietrich Kuckermann were both recruited to the Royal Aircraft Establishment, where they arrived in 1947 and had the remainder of their extensive careers. And the influence indirectly that Hilda had in reporting the work of these people resulted in the wing design, the swept back wing design of the VC-10, the thin delta design of the Concorde. And when I think back to Hilda's work, where she was given a design of an aeroplane and asked to find out, why it wasn't behaving the way they expected, which was basically what you might think of as function following form. So you've got an existing thing, and you're trying to find out what's going on. The innovation that Johanna Weber and Dietrich Kuckermann introduced was of form following function, where they said, what performance do you want? Okay, based on that, here is the shape of wing you're going to need. So I mentioned that her work on aerodynamic behavior of planes was very important. A piece of work that she started during the war and continued right up until her death in 1946 was on the theoretical analysis of longitudinal dynamic stability in gliding flight. And she was looking at what kind of damping you would need to do to prevent an aeroplane doing what you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, which is kind of behaving like a porpoise would do in the sea, but something called phugoid motion, which aeroplanes can get into this kind of standing wave in the air, and it becomes very difficult to break out of. And nowadays, aeroplanes have computerized computer programs that deal with this. But this was only just starting to be understood when Hilda Lyon was working on it. And this paper, published during the war and with further data just about the time she died, is one that's been cited even in modern times, particularly by people who are looking at things like biomimetics and how you can copy the way animals behave in technical terms. So tragically, Hilda Lyon died at the age of 50 in 1946 after a botched operation. This is her grave in Market Wheaton, her birthplace. And there in the bottom right is that shop again. That's the shop that had Lyon over the front in the first slide. Now still a convenience grocery store. And in 2019, I worked with the family and with the town council and indeed McColl's, who paid for most of this, to get a blue plaque put up in her memory on the outside of the shop. And if you happen to be in Yorkshire, I can commend a visit to a very nice little town with a delightful high street full of all sorts of interesting shops and cafes. And you can go and admire Hilda Lyon's plaque. So that brings us to the end of Hilda Lyon's story. But you can read a lot more about her in the book that I wrote, which came as a direct result of meeting relatives and seeing more of the family archives when I visited Market Wheaton in 2018 and 19. The book is available from Amazon, but if you want a signed copy, or if you want a copy for a review for a journal or something similar, please get in touch directly and I will arrange to get things to you at cost price. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. That was lovely. That was really, really interesting. What I found interesting as well is how Market Wheaton, if that's the way you pronounce it, also stars in one of our other stories of Bombsite Bertha and Dorothy Robson, which we were going to highlight on Sunday, but unfortunately the tour was taking place at the Commonwealth gravesite at Harrogate, so that's the Stonefall Cemetery, and because of the circumstances, they're not actually doing it this
Right.
week, so we've had to postpone that. But yeah, it's interesting that Market Wheaton has a history of aeronautics and connections with aeroplanes and things. So yeah, that's been really, really useful to hear.
Well, the irony of her being born there is that just up the road at a place called Howden was where the R100 was built, but she never worked there. She worked at the other one down south.
Yeah, just around the corner from me, because I can see it if I go out of my house. I can see the Cardington hangars. So I think I've said that to you before. So yes, well, thank you very much. I don't know whether anybody's got any questions for Nina. I think you can actually unmute yourselves, but I will also send everybody an unmute and see. I tried doing this the other day and it didn't work the way I wanted it to. So you might have to type into the chat if you've got any questions.
Or put your hand up or something.
Yeah. Sarah, can you unmute yourself? Are you able to unmute yourself just as a test? Are you able to unmute yourself?
Oh, yes. Yes, yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. No,
I don't have any questions, but it was fascinating talk.
Thank you.
And really interesting, and quite an interesting link about Joanna Weber to
yes.
The RAE comes up so much, doesn't it?
Yes.
So,
yeah. Didn't you mention
group?
Joe?
Yeah, because I thought, well, because
when you did
Billing would have known her, but not at the same time. They weren't sort of contemporaries, but they did know each other. Yeah.
I mean, I often wonder if Hilda met Johanna when she was in Germany in the 1930s, because Johanna Weber would have been an undergraduate maths student there then at Göttingen.
Yeah.
And there wouldn't, and although, you know, this was the era of the rising Nazism and so on, and in fact there was, while she was in Göttingen, there was a purge of the Jewish academics. Prandtl himself was actually a supporter of women in technical work, and he had quite a number of women in his research team, quite unusual for the time.
Yeah, it's really interesting area to explore. I think particularly with so many women involved in aviation research and aerospace research.
Yeah.
Fantastic story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. So if nobody's not got anything flagging up in the comments or the chat, so just on behalf of the Women's Engineering Society, thank you once again, Nina, for your time, which you give so generously.
What else am I going to be doing?
Could do some more indexing. Yes, and I'd just like to add that we have got a couple more talks left that you can tap into. If you're down in Somerset, I'm down in Street tomorrow doing an overview of 10 women down in Street at the Alfred Gillay Trust. And that will be just an overview of all the women we've looked at this week. On Friday, we will be joined by Gail Hewlett, the granddaughter-in-law of Hilda Hewlett, aviator, pilot, flying instructor. So she'll be joining us on Friday. And then on Saturday, I will be up at the chapel on the bridge in Rotherham, where one of our other women engineers got married. That is Monica Maurice, and we will be joined by a member of Monica's family. There is a small exhibition there. I'm not actually going to be giving a guest presentation there, but I will be available if anybody wants to come and talk to me. That just remains to say thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and hopefully you can join us at another meet somewhere along the line. Thank you very much.